everybody. Thank you very much for joining us. My name's Andrew Harding. I'm a BBC correspondent. I'm actually in Johannesburg. I try to cover this continent for BBC News. I have a wonderful session for you, 6 guests with very different pursuits and takes on the theme of achieving sustainability. At least that's the headline we've been given. I'm not sure I even agree with achieving sustainability as a goal. It sounds a little bit corporate speaky to me. I feel like we should be looking for something a bit more radical, something a bit more urgent, something that doesn't sound like something you might say to your shareholders, don't worry, we're trying to achieve sustainability within a blah, blah, blah. So let's get down to it. I'm going to be ruthless with these 6 guests, some of them activists, some of them from the corporate sector. We're going to move towards the theme of ecocide, which, as some of you I hope know, is a new law that may soon be adopted by the International Criminal Court, just like genocide, crimes against humanity, as a way of kind of scaring, bullying, forcing corporate leaders and government leaders to take the threat of imprisonment, of being held guilty of ecocide seriously in order to change behavior. But before that, we have the gentler lowlands and hills, if you like, of the legal processes that are trying to change corporate behavior, trying to make governments and corporations behave better. And what I'd like to do, rather than wasting time introducing our 6 guests, is get them to do it. And in turn, if you could each please just give us a sense of the points you're trying to make tonight, because we do have an audience here, and I hope you will be giving us some great pointed, difficult questions later on once we've finished discussing some of these themes. But let's start, if we could, with the Dutch version, if you like, of Friends of the Earth, Milieu Défoncé, Nina de Pater. And you're actually, I think, at COP in Glasgow today. So I've already broken the rules, I've already introduced you, but if you could tell us a bit more about yourself and why you're here, what you want to get out of this discussion.
Hey, yeah, thank you for inviting me. Apologies in advance. I'm at the venue. There's a lot of people around. I tried to find the most quiet place I could in my surroundings, but there are some people talking. Quite funny that you mentioned climate litigation as the hills, the foreland, because I think it is an immense effort that we are all making, and it is a lot of work to win a court case like we did. So I'm working on the court case that we've recently won against Shell, Royal Dutch Shell, one of the biggest polluters in the world, one of the biggest CO2 emitters. And we
you obliged them to cut their emissions by 45% by 2030.
Exactly. Yeah. So we asked the judge, and the judge agreed. And of course, there was a lot of research behind that, a lot of arguments, which we can all discuss if you would like. But I think some of the other speakers also want to talk. But I think one of the things that is very interesting and relevant to mention is that it was not just Friends of the Earth that was doing this. We got 17,000 individual co-plaintiffs, so people from the Netherlands who joined us in this case, and together with all these people and with some other environmental organizations, we succeeded. So this is really a movement. This is really people versus big oil. So I leave it at that and give the floor to the next speaker, and I'll get back to you.
Fantastic. Thank you. Well, let's go to Wendy Franks, who is from Northland Power, a power company, but one that's very much involved and focused on renewables. Wendy.
Thanks, Andrew. Hi, everyone. First off, thank you very much to the organizers for inviting me. I'm delighted to be part of this important discussion. My name is Wendy Franks. I lead basically a business development function at Northland Power. My team is building out our new initiatives, which includes hydrogen, renewable fuels, storage, basically the next wave of decarbonization technologies. Northland Power is a publicly traded company in Canada. The vast majority of our cash flow comes from renewable power assets. We have 3 large offshore wind operating farms in Europe, and we're looking to grow. I can speak a little bit to the corporate perspective when it comes to decarbonization. We are trying to build as many renewable energy projects as possible, as we possibly can, to support global decarbonization. One of the biggest challenges that I see is really around the cost of decarbonization. And part and parcel of that cost is around regulatory frameworks and policies. And basically the thumbnail or my key message for today for this discussion is the more that we have stable policy and regulatory frameworks, the cheaper it becomes to decarbonize. That is the message in a thumbnail. Companies and corporates are dealing with instability around cost of carbon, around climate change targets, around tax regimes, and basically instability equals expense.
And when you see what the Milieu Défense have done with Shell, in a word, does that fill you with hope or fear?
I really can't comment on that specifically, but I would just say that anything that moves corporates to decarbonize faster, I'm personally very supportive of. The carbon budget, as I think everyone knows, for developed nations is going to run out at the end of 2030. So anything that is beyond 2030 is not part of the solution.
Okay, let's go to Sophie now, Sophie Dymbiński.
Hi, everyone, and thank you also for having me and for the organisation of this event. So I work for Ecosia. We're a search engine that plants trees. We're one of the largest tree planting organisations in the world now, and the largest of endangered species of trees, actually. So we've planted about 137 million trees worldwide. And we exist basically because of the gap in international legislation and leadership, which we so much need to protect the vital ecosystems and forests around the world. And Ecosia exists to reforest the planet. That's basically our mission. But we're planting all these trees and people keep on ripping them out because there is this gap. And so what we see is that even though there are, there's lots of regulation and there are plenty of pledges, we saw another one this week. We know that fines often for large corporates, we see this in the tech sector as a search engine, often don't fully deter the bad behavior that we need, and we need to do this quickly. And we also know that there's no cheaper or faster way to cut CO2 emissions than to protect forests and reduce tropical deforestation. So that's why we exist, and why we're supportive of ecocide is essentially we do need this shift in global consciousness, and we need businesses like ours, purpose-driven companies, to not only be sustainable but also to be climate positive. So I hope, Andrew, that's something a bit more ambitious that we're striving for. So climate positivity, not just neutrality and avoiding kind of doing no harm, but actually going and actually reforesting, rewilding the planet. We need that. So we are very supportive of this, and we would like to work with companies that would like to push this and tell the politicians that this is very much something that we need to endorse at a global level.
So very briefly, I mean, you said there's already lots of regulation, but you think that an ecocide law on the statutes at the ICC would be an order of magnitude different somehow, not just another set of laws?
Absolutely. I think it's that culture shift and change in mindset that we really need. This kind of evolution of the duty of care for directors, etc. There are trends that we're heading in this direction. If we don't do it now, then we're really at a crossroads. So this needs to happen as soon as possible. So absolutely, and like we see across many sectors, regulations and fines, take you somewhere, but they don't take you far enough. And I think this would be very, very helpful.
Okay, next to Roger Martella. I hope you found a hot desk somewhere there in the very busy hall. It sounded like you were racing through trying to find somewhere to sit down. Are you there?
I am. Thank you very much. I like my colleague, I was just leaving a panel presentation at COP26 where I was speaking. So thanks for accommodating me. I hope I'm coming through loud and clear. I was able to get to a quiet place. So thank you for your question about sustainability in companies. And I would just say at General Electric, we think of sustainability in kind of with three lenses. One is we want to be part of the solution. I think this goes to the theme of corporate social responsibility and how companies, not just GE, how companies can come up to help be part of the solution. So we're focused on our legacy of wanting to solve for the energy transition and climate change. We produce equipment that powers 1/3 of the world's energy. And we want to decarbonize the energy sector while also making sure that energy is affordable, sustainable, reliable at the same time. So decarbonize the energy sector, but make it resilient. Our sustainability commitment also includes delivering precision healthcare to the half of the world's population that lacks access to it, as well as the future of flight, having a more sustainable future of flight so people can stay connected for economic opportunities, family, friends, and so on. So part one of this is corporate social responsibility and innovating technology, our theme of innovating technology to be part of the solution. Part two is how can we, and I'm getting a request to put on my camera. I apologize,
yeah,
but I can't put on my camera given where I am. Unfortunately, where I'm at here at the venue, probably not a good idea. So I'll have to stay on the audio. The second part is as a company does business, and we're a big global company, how do we reduce our impacts along the way? How do we improve our impacts to our people, to our communities, and to the planet? This is what I think frequently people refer to as ESG, environmental, social, and governance considerations. And so while we're looking to be part of the solution, issue number one, we're always looking to improve our impact. We've made climate change commitments like other companies, but also looking at human rights, how well run of a company we are, product stewardship, and issues like that we can talk about.
Okay.
And then the third lens in which we look at sustainability.
Okay, you know, you don't have to do all of this now. We're going to have a long discussion, but if you can keep it brief.
Okay, fine. We can move on.
All right. Let's go to Noah next from German Watch.
Yeah, hello, everyone. I work with an NGO called German Watch, and I'm also a research fellow at University College London. And with German Watch, we support a lawsuit that a Peruvian farmer has brought against the German energy company RWE. And this is over what responsibility energy companies have for their historical contribution to climate change. So the idea with this one lawsuit is to say that this company has made a substantial contribution to global warming, and because of that, they should help deal with the problems that that's causing. So in this specific case, that has to do with flood risk in Peru, which is caused by melting glaciers. But of course, the broader idea here is to establish legal mechanisms for holding major polluters accountable. So according to the polluter pays principle. So if this the Shell case that Nina talked about earlier is looking toward the future, this looks toward the past. You know, what responsibility do these major actors have?
And what's the status of that case?
So this case, it's been going through the courts for almost 6 years now, and the judges have actually found that the case is legally admissible, so that it has a solid legal foundation. So potentially this could be the basis for a major legal precedent. And now the judges are hearing evidence, so basically to see whether there's enough scientific evidence to prove this causal chain between RWE and their emissions as a result of burning coal in Germany, and then climate change impacts in Peru. So it's still ongoing.
Excellent. I'm going to come to Jojo in a second, but I just want to say that although I'm kind of chairing this or moderating this, if you guys want to have a go at each other in a polite, dignified fashion, or you want to ask each other questions, you're much better placed to do that than I am. So please just raise your hand or just speak out. I don't want a free for all, but I think we need to be kind of challenging each other, and it's not just me as a moderator who's going to do that. It might be a bit dull if I just keep asking you worthy questions. So anyway, with that in mind, Jojo Mehta from the Stop Ecocide Foundation.
Hi there. Yes, I co-founded in 2017 the public campaign Stop Ecocide, which has grown from, at the time, a sort of grassroots campaign to what is clearly now a sort of central communications hub for a very rapidly growing global movement with affiliates and teams all around the world, websites in 9 languages, and engaging with over a dozen governments around this possibility of criminalizing ecocide at the international level. We aim particularly for the international level because, well, a number of reasons. One is that the International Criminal Court has a very specific amendment procedure in place already. It doesn't involve starting a whole new treaty, for example, but also it's the only global mechanism directly accessing the criminal justice systems of all its member states. So if, as a member state, you ratify a crime there, you have to include it in your own domestic legislation. So it's potentially an efficient and effective way of creating a new ground rule across many, we hope, jurisdictions. Also important because some of the worst polluters are transnational corporations with the ability to hop from one jurisdiction to another according to where regulation might be more lax. There's also another reason, which has sort of been touched on by Sophie, which is that if we aim for the international level, making ecocide or destruction of natural systems a serious crime, we're actually, in a sense, creating or beginning to create a new level of taboo around destroying nature, because we all know you can't go to a government and say, oh, I'd like a permit for 500 people to be killed for my new project. We'll arrange it all for you and give you lots of jobs. No, doesn't work. Wouldn't even cross your mind, in fact. But we don't have that same sort of recoil, which is healthy, from destroying ecosystems. And it is becoming ever more evident that we actually desperately need to have that reaction. We need to be saying, no, actually, we can't do this because it's causing too much destruction. And in fact, the conference that some of us are actually attending this week, and many people online, is focused all around climate and climate change. And of course, this is one of the biggest global issues humanity has ever faced, but it is also a symptom rather than a cause. Whereas ecocide, we feel, goes to one of the root causes of climate change, which is systemic destruction of ecosystems as part and parcel of our economic approach. I'm just going to throw a third thing in the mix, which actually is slightly contradicts what Andrew said at the beginning about ecocide being sort of up on the mountains and the other sort of legal steps being in the foothills. I think they're sort of they're complementary rather than sort of hierarchical, if you see what I mean. They're different kinds of law. There's many climate cases going on around the world now, upwards of 1,500, I believe. And it's all very important because what it does is it brings those issues in front of governments and potentially, creates judgments where the governments have to pay attention to, or the corporations have to pay attention to. Also creates an incredibly useful bank of evidence. The one thing it doesn't do that criminal law has the capacity to do, we believe in a very strong way, is actually change behaviour. Because criminal law is protective law. So, your right to life is protected by the fact that taking that life is a crime. And so ecocide at the moment is lacking. So that foundational rule is lacking in the environmental world. So there's a big body of environmental regulation, but it's not taken anything like as seriously as law that protects people or property. And we believe that putting ecocide alongside genocide and war crimes will start to shift that perspective in quite a major way. And just very quickly, we don't just believe it's a stick, we actually believe it's a carrot as well. In other words, if you have, I say this as a former entrepreneur myself, if you have a clear limit, a clear parameter, you can start getting really creative and innovative. And I think this also speaks to what Wendy Franks was saying as well, in terms of just having the right legal frameworks in place is actually better for business. And just to finish off, we had the most incredible piece of news last week, which is that the biggest network of asset managers in the world, the International Corporate Governance Network, that deals with governance and stewardship at that level, and its members manage over half the world's managed assets, like 59 trillion plus. Their statement to COP26 specifically recommended that governments criminalize ecocide. And I think that's a really extraordinary symptom of, a sign of how much a new parameter really is needed. Anyway, looking forward to further discussion.
Yeah, thank you all. I'm not going to keep going around in an orderly loop, but I am going to go back to Nina first, because I'd like to hear a little bit more about how that engagement with Shell ended up. Jojo was talking there about it being a carrot as well as a stick, and I wonder whether Shell ended up kind of acknowledging what you were doing, not fighting it. And I also wondered if you had any questions for our two corporate representatives, Wendy and Roger, on this, about that and how they are kind of engaging with this kind of process.
Yeah, I think one of the important things in this court case was that we really exposed the facts about Shell. So Shell is, I think, one of the champions when it comes to greenwashing, showing a very green image, talking a lot about their initiatives that are like not even 5% of all of their investment goes to renewables, but that's all you see in media. And the court doesn't really cares about stories about words, they care about facts. So I think this is one thing that we were able to show, like the true face of Shell. And after the court win, we got a lot of reactions from all over the world telling us that they finally believe that something can change because of this big party that was showed that it does not have the ultimate power. And how we ended up in court with them, we tried so many different ways. So we tried to engage with them. We tried to have a conversation. We tried it through policymakers, direct action, and all of that was not working. And you don't want to go to court because doing a court case is expensive. It takes a lot of time. It is really the last resort. So we ended up in court. Well, we won. And well, Shell appealed, so we're not done yet. But one of the great things is that although they did appeal, they still have to prosecute the verdict. So that's one of the nice things about Dutch law and about this specific verdict. So Shell needs to reduce its CO2 emissions, and not just their own CO2 emissions from the production, but also from the products. So technically that's called scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. And this is very unique. So there are a lot of unique things about this court case. And it is also interesting to see how other companies are responding to this, because in this verdict is a lot that can be applied to other companies. For example, how companies have to respect human rights, how they are responsible for their whole value chain and not just for their production processes. So maybe to answer your question, or to ask this question to people who are on the corporate side, I'm really curious, how did you look at this verdict, and did it change anything in how you are approaching this specific topics? I think both of you are not entirely out of fossil fuels, and some of the media portrayed the day that we won the black day for fossil fuels, and I think that it is a black day for fossil fuels, because it showed that that the limit is there, that we need to go to zero when it comes to oil, gas, and coal.
Okay, well, let's put that to Roger and Wendy, and let's congratulate Roger and reward him for switching his camera on so he can go first.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate it. I was able to move over to a place. Hopefully this is quiet enough. So in terms of the question, I think includes, what are we doing about climate change in scope 1 and scope 2 and scope 3? In the last year, we've made a couple big announcements on that. We are committing to be carbon neutral in our scope 1 and scope 2 emissions by 2030. And we're a big industrial multinational company with 174,000 employees in 170 countries. So we think that's a significant commitment. We're really passionate about it. We're working hard on it. We want to show progress every year. And we're going to be pretty transparent in terms of how we're doing. I'd like to think we're making good progress. And if we have some setbacks, we're going to be transparent. So I'm saying, okay, this is something that maybe didn't go in the right direction. I don't have anything yet, but we're committed to not only making progress, but also being transparent about how we're doing on our progress and explaining where things don't go quite according to plan. The other thing we've done is made earlier this year announced an ambition to be net zero on our scope 3 emissions. I think to the point, it is fair. We still continue to engage in fossil fuel businesses in addition to renewable energy. We make gas turbines, very efficient gas turbines, and jet engines. And so when a company like GE that's engaged in technology that uses fossil fuels say we have an ambition to be net zero by 2050, it's great for our emissions, but I think it's even more important than that. What it really means is that people can count on us to innovate the technology, to make the investments you need to make. These are huge investments to know that our customers, countries are going to have the tools they need to meet their own ambitions. So that's what we're doing today. We're working to research and development to innovate the technology for our turbines, for our energy, for our planes. And I can't tell you exactly what the next 30 years are going to look like. We're working hard on it, but to help our customers and countries meet their own scope 1, scope 2, scope 3 ambitions. So that's how we've been approaching it.
Thanks, Roger. I'm going to come to Wendy in a second, but Sophie, how did you, what did you make of that from General Electric?
I thought it was a very good answer in lots of ways, but also I couldn't help but wonder about this this idea, it's a separate question really around kind of net zero and neutrality versus climate positivity, because there's a lot of work that we need to do when it comes to kind of healing or restoring the planet as well. So I think that's a general question about this idea of kind of imagination. I think we all need to have big visions now when it comes to fighting climate change and just reducing what we're doing. And then in some cases, lots of companies are obviously also offsetting. You know, does that really get us to where we need in this wider fight, given the climate crisis we're in? So that's my only point there, I would say, but it is a separate discussion, of course.
Thank you. Wendy, what are you up to on this?
So Nina's quite correct. So we get about 30% of our cash flow comes from natural gas generation assets. And we've had a lot of, we put a lot of effort into figuring out what we do with these assets. These assets, the cash flow that we generate from them, they're not as highly valued in the marketplace. We're a publicly traded company. So in terms of shareholder value and cost of capital, having this cash flow in our cash flow mix brings down our overall share price and it increases our cost of capital. So like for us to have these assets, it's not a great thing for us, but here's the offset to them. These assets generate really good quality, stable cash flow that we're actually using to fund the development of our offshore wind projects. So the cash flow from that thermal is not being reinvested into other thermal assets. It's being reinvested into offshore wind projects where we're replacing carbon that would otherwise be generated by the grid. Now, I think that answer gets you part of the way there. And here's the other part of the answer, and something I've been spending a lot of time thinking about. So say we were to sell these assets, and we can't right now because we need the cash flow, but say we were to sell these assets, and these assets are, or we sell them and they're off our balance sheet and they go to someone else, and they may go to someone else who uses the assets more. So right now, our thermal assets in the province of Ontario, where I am, they're not actually always being dispatched. They're actually sitting idle. We actually earn money for them just to be providing the capacity in case the system operator needs them in a pinch, then we fire them up. But right now, they're actually not producing carbon. So if we sell them to someone, say we sell them to an entity that wants to use them for a data center, maybe they're actually going to turn them on. So how do we feel about that? Is that a good outcome in that they're no longer on our balance sheet, they're no longer part of Northland, but they've gone, they're still there, they still exist, and they're producing carbon. And here's what I think the answer to that is. Because there is, because I believe in the functioning of the capital markets, and because capital doesn't want to go right now to assets that are producing carbon, never before has there been so much alignment between governments, corporations, and the public to decarbonize. I think that the people who are going to buy, the enterprises who are going to buy those thermal assets are actually better positioned to figure out how to decarbonize them than I am. So what does Northland Power know? We know how to develop and operate renewable power assets. There are other enterprises out there that are more natural owners of thermal assets who are investing in carbon capture, who are investing in what Sophie's doing and planting trees. These are big questions on how to do that. I'm not best positioned to do that, but if I sell them to someone else who is better positioned to do that, maybe on a net all-in fully accounted basis, that is a better outcome.
No, are you convinced?
Well, I would say that the key issue here is that for every bit of gas you burn or oil or coal or whatever, you're still contributing to the problem. And the problem here is that this, up until now, the climate change has largely been an externality in the sense that corporations haven't had to take any kind of responsibility for the impacts that they're contributing to. And of course, there are some corporations who've contributed much more than others. And at the very top of the list, we have companies like ExxonMobil that have contributed over 3% of historic industrial emissions. The issue here is that what we really need is some kind of structures forcing corporations to take responsibility. So if they want to continue emitting, that means taking financial responsibility for the impacts that those emissions ultimately cause through their contribution to global warming. And that's what we're trying to achieve, supporting the lawsuit of this Peruvian farmer who's suing RWE in Germany. And ultimately, we might say that ecocide is going another step further. So if what we're talking about is taking the corporations should take financial responsibility, with ecocide, we might say that the key actors should ultimately also take criminal responsibility for the contribution to the impacts of climate change that we can already see all around the world.
Okay, thank you very much. I've just been in Cape Town, a city that nearly ran out of water a couple of years ago because of drought. And the real message from people there was that fear works. Fear is a motivating factor for behavior change, for governmental change. And I know Jojo earlier was talking about the carrot and the stick. And I'd still like to stick with Wendy and Roger on this for a little bit longer in terms of litigation and the extent to which you think that can change behavior. We heard, of course, from Nina saying that Shell is still fighting this case that they brought against them. But how do you see this increasingly sort of activist litigation influencing your companies? Roger, you first.
Well, I would say some part of what I hear in the conversation so far is stakeholders wanting to work with companies, and then looking at litigation as one of their options. We work very closely with all of our stakeholders, our customers, our governments, our investors, and so we look for opportunities to make sure that we're hearing from them, that we're being responsive to their positions, and I think we've been quite successful in managing those issues. When I talked about our Scope 3 ambition, our shareholders, really thought that was important to them, and we agreed. We actually supported the shareholder request on the Scope 3 ambition and worked with them, and they were thankful that we did, and said a bunch of things that were congratulatory of collaborating. So we have, not gone down the litigation path, and we've, very strategically wanted to work with our shareholders to hear their input and make sure we're resolving things collaboratively and adjusting our strategies in consideration of what we're hearing from them.
Wendy?
Yeah, I guess the one thing I just want to add is I want to underscore the point around cost of capital. If you want to go to the market right now as a public or even a private company and raise funds to build a best-in-class thermal combined cycle gas turbine plant, it would be very, very difficult to find the money to do that. Increasingly, all of the pools of capital that used to exist that you could do this, they just don't exist anymore. What does that mean? It means, and this is again my personal view, I don't think another gas turbine plant is going to get built in the US. There's one being built in Canada right now. I think it's going to be the last one in Canada that gets built. And the reason why, and what everybody gets wrong in their models, if you go to Baringa or Woodmac or any of those typical advisors, they're assuming that gas continues to get dispatched in the system because they're assuming that these plants, gas peaker plants in particular, continue to get built because they're assuming the wrong cost of capital, and a cost of capital that just doesn't exist anymore. And so I think, in that natural force, is actually very much, it's new, it's changing very quickly, it's changing faster than anyone ever expected, and it's really squeezing that out of the system. And what it's going to be replaced by, because you need, I think Roger made the comment about resiliency. It's about building grids, low cost, reliable, resilient grids. It's going to be storage plus renewables that is going to replace the baseload power that is now performed by natural gas in the grid. And that's changing very quickly. And just as context, I used to be an investor for the largest pension fund in Canada, and it was extremely difficult to get anything through board approval that had anything to do with the generation of carbon. It's just changed very, very quickly.
I'd love to hear from Sophie and Jojo about what you make of that. I mean, that sounds quite quite impressive in terms of the speed of change in the corporate world. I'm going to throw into the mix an early question. It's quite a long one, but it's from somebody talking about Indigenous people and the concern about carbon offsetting, which is tearing us apart. Carbon pricing schemes put a price on the very air that we breathe. We commodify nature that we all have a right to. I wondered if perhaps either of you could kind of weave that into your answer. Jojo, I saw you raising your hand, but I also, Sophie, you're nodding. But let's start with Jojo.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the carbon offsetting situation is really problematic. It has not done what it probably was professed to, to be going to do, and has ended up commodifying nature in a really quite destructive way. And interestingly, I'm going to be in a conversation tomorrow with Ralph Shami, who's one of the assistant directors of the International Monetary Fund, actually is involved in something called Rebalance Earth, where they're actually looking at really transforming that whole carbon offsetting market by effectively having carbon offsetting not supporting the buying up of land or forest or all these kinds of solutions like the RED system encourages, but actually looking at investing in the preservation in perpetuity of ecosystems and keystone species, because if you actually look at the real, if you look at the values in there that have been ignored by our economic system virtually almost completely, what you should be looking at is the fact that natural systems are worth wildly more alive and protected than they are dead, and that's a big problem that we currently have in our economic system. So it's fantastic that there are people working on actually shifting that mentality and shifting some, actually very almost sort of inserting some little bugs in the system so that how the system currently works can work in favor of protecting rather than in favor of destroying. But I think one of the things that is coming back to me as sort of as a theme during this conversation is that it's obviously, I think it sounds very positive, the things that Roger and Wendy are talking about. And of course, the thing is that this currently is everybody's kind of racing to, either to do the right thing or to look like they're doing the right thing. In reality, the speed at which we're moving in the right direction is very, very slow, given the timescales that we've got. And actually, it's actually much harder to think of positive things to do in a framework that isn't working than it is to simply shift the framework. Really not that much, but so that a parameter is there that effectively adds a layer to the decision-making process. I spoke to an insurance chap last year who sort of said, well, where would you put ecocide into the kind of risk and governance frameworks that we're dealing with? And I said, look, I'm not an insurance expert, don't know a huge amount about risk and governance, but wherever you put murder, that's where you put ecocide. And his face just kind of went, it was like he'd suddenly had this little explosion in his brain. And he kind of went, but that's uninsurable. And I was like, exactly. The point is, if you put a line in place, a red line in place, beyond which things get seriously problematic and people's personal freedom is on the line, what you're doing, yes, you might be scaring them, and that might be what happens, but it also might be that they're just kind of going, well, actually, I just can't go there, so let's go somewhere else. Because finance will continue to flow where it's allowed to flow. It's just like water, so unless you actually put a stop to certain directions, it won't start flowing in other directions. You get streams that start going in other directions, and I completely agree with Wendy. I think it's brilliant that that there are markets where that is starting to shift, but without that sort of additional parameter, we're doing that same thing that was it Einstein says, you're trying to sort of throw, use the same sort of framework but get a different solution, and effectively that's kind of the definition of madness. Unless we change that parameter, that's very difficult to see how that will actually start to change.
Thank you, Jojo. I'm going to come to you, Sophie, in a second, but Roger, just a response to that.
I share the sense of urgency. Sincerely, we do, and we want to move as quickly as possible, and we're acting with urgency too. I would agree with the proposition that people probably will look at everything companies are doing and say it's not quick enough, but that doesn't mean that we're not acting with urgency. From my perspective, we want to act with credibility too. Something I said earlier is if something's not going well, I'm going to be very transparent. If something goes the wrong direction, I'm going to share why that happened so you understand. So we're going to have some bumps in the road, but I just hope no one mistakes that for a lack of motivation or lack of incentive to act with urgency, because we're feeling it 24 hours a day, not only because it's what our stakeholders we want, we do listen to them, but going back to my initial point when I opened up about our responsibility, our legacy is we sincerely share these goals, of wanting to make sure that we're addressing these issues. And we believe in our role in innovation and technology, which is a really hard problem. It's very challenging. Few people are positioned as well as we are to do it. And we're investing, 1.5 billion a year into R&D just to work on the technology we're going to need to solve these issues in the upcoming years, working really hard at it.
What Wendy was saying about the money simply not being there anymore for gas turbines and the like, are you seeing the same, or actually is the money still there if you need it?
I think Wendy's point goes to sustainable finance and how both public institutions and private institutions are setting their own goals. It's a big theme of COP26. It's something we've been talking about a lot. And so I'd say those are changing. I don't know I'd go so far to say it's not there, but certainly different sets of questions, different scrutiny. Some public institutions, the UK, for example, has said it's only going to finance export gas turbines in very limited circumstances. The EU is looking at a taxonomy for gas turbines. So I think it really depends on the institution, but no doubt about it, everybody's taking a very close look at it.
Sophie.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to kind of say thank you to the question that was provided by the audience member around carbon offsetting. We very much share this view, and our trees at Ecosia are not used for carbon offsetting. We don't think that a tree is the sum of the carbon that it sequesters. There's much more to it, and the biodiversity that it protects and is able to flourish through one tree in a forest is much more important than simply kind of commodifying it in that respect. So that's the first thing I just wanted to say to that. I absolutely agree. And then kind of more broadly, this idea of the carrot and the stick, I think that we're going back to that systemic view in the sense that we're all kind of victims of a system where there's been a lack of accountability around being able to profit from damaging the environment. It's a deeply flawed system, and the current legal framework supports that to some degree. So this idea that nature simply kind of replenishes itself and repairs itself, and no matter what we take from it, is flawed. And so I think just on the point of ecocide, definitely agree with the idea around parameters and creativity. And at Ecosia, we have definitely made sure that those parameters are much more ambitious than what I think other companies are doing, really. So we're keeping ourselves accountable to perhaps a different set of principles. But with ecocide, there is not only a rejection of business models that profit from the destruction of the planet, but there's also very much a reason to be hopeful in the sense that it gives us a way out of this wider system, and actually gives us a potential to change how we view the global economy and opens up so many more opportunities. So that's just the point in the kind of the carrot and the stick bit as well.
Okay, thanks. You mentioned ecocide. We've got a question here from the audience about ecocide. So let's shift in what remains of this session. Time is rushing by. We've got a quarter of an hour left. From Bogota in Colombia, Ms. Maria Emilia Burgos asks, will ecocide law help sustainable fashion efforts, and how? We talked about so many different ways in that ecocide can perhaps, as a law, could influence people, and clearly fashion is an area. It might not seem like the most important, pressing, but it is one of those areas where people care how they're seen. Jojo.
I think that whole issue of people being of companies caring how they're seen is really important here. I also think it's really important that if you're going to change something as fundamental at the criminal level as would be the case, bringing in ecocide law, it can't be done overnight. It's got to, there's got to be some time for those in each of those industries to actually look at how are they going to be able to comply with that. And what will that mean for that industry? And I'm not an expert in the fashion industry, but I'm also aware that it is quite a significant contributor to ecological destruction and to climate. And I think that and this is probably true of a number of industries. I think there's a lot of tweaking at the edges around sort of making improving supply chains and those kinds of things, but actually our whole sort of cultural attitude to clothing and fashion, particularly in the West, is just not sustainable long term. We're very, very throwaway about it. I mean, about clothing in a way that we are about not so many other things. I mean, it's a very noticeable contributor. And actually, again, I've mentioned, do look up on our website, stopecocide.earth. We're doing an event on Friday night, actually, which, and all of these will be live streamed as well as in person in Glasgow, but that actually focuses specifically on the kind of these two issues. What can businesses do? And then the example that we're using is actually the fashion industry. And we're going to have a kind of stitching discussion between panelists, you know, sort of showing you the ways that, you know, one could actually have a conversation while upcycling one's clothes. You know, it just as a kind of to bring in a bit of a kind of wild card thing about what one could do. And one of the things that we're launching actually earlier in that evening is a concept of that kind of responds to exactly that kind of question. How is it each industry going to look at these things? Because we're so used in our society for, you know, we used to kind of siloed top-down thinking. We're used to waiting to be told what to do by government, you know, in particular sectors and so on, and pretty much, you know, very kind of hierarchical approach to things. But my co-director actually had a conversation with her brother not long ago. And he's in big infrastructure projects. I mean, you know, electricity substations under the sea, the kind of thing Roger's probably involved in, you know, these really big infrastructure projects. And when she told him about ecocide law, he had about half a dozen very specific questions. You know, how's that going to affect our cement procurement? You know, what's that going to do with our engineering of this? And what about the lads dealing with, you know, this or that? You know, very specific questions. And I suddenly thought, my God, it was kind of a eureka moment in a way. It's like, my God, all the expertise and all the exact questions that need to be asked are already in all of these sectors, because these are the people who are actually working on these things. And actually what we need is for people to be able to get their heads around it and have time to do that. So when somebody asked me recently, you know, what would you suggest to government that they budget for in order to prepare for for a law of ecocide approaching? You know, which is clearly on the cards. I mean, political advisors are telling us, yeah, we fully expect this to come in online at some point fairly soon. And my response was, well, why don't, you know, they supported so many businesses during COVID, you know, that couldn't continue to function or whatever. What about just supporting everybody to spend a few hours a week actually, you know, applying their expertise in their own sector to how would they address this new parameter? You know, the youth movement calls itself Fridays for Future, right? What if we actually used Fridays for that?
Okay, I'm going to turn now to Nina. We haven't heard from you for a bit. And one thing that struck me, and what Jojo was saying there about the speed of change, I've been involved a little in sort of hosting or chairing some of Stop Ecocide's campaigns, and I've been astonished by the speed with which things get done. And there was a drafting plan. Suddenly, lawyers from around the world had drafted a definition of ecocide. Suddenly, it's being pushed forward now to the ICC, and it seems, perhaps it's the pandemic, but it seems like a lot of people have a lot of time and a sense of urgency to get this thing done. And I wondered, just in terms of the speed with which legal matters move, I know that you were saying 6 years it's taken for this case with Shell, but are you encouraged by the speed that the Stop Ecocide movement is catching on?
Yeah, I think it is very impressive to see how fast the developments are in climate litigation in general. Stop Ecocide, I consider it as part of climate litigation, climate governance, this whole movement. And it took us 5-6 years to get to the victory that we had in May, but it was because we were doing groundbreaking work. It was the first time that this was being done, so all of the research needed to be done, and now we can really go quicker. We can reproduce this lawsuit and go to other companies, and the same we saw happening with national governments after the Dutch government lost its court case. We see this type of court cases all over the world, and every day I could make it my job to go around and advise people on how they could start lawsuits against the oil majors, and I think that's insane and also so important. So that shows how quick this development is going. And one of the things that I think it will move in the future is not just responsibility of the companies itself, but also liability of board members, CEOs that are being held liable for their own responsibilities in the climate crisis. So that's, I think, one thing to well, maybe not look forward to, but something that I think will happen next. And since you asked me this question, maybe I can plug something here. On Tuesday, on the 9th, we will actually host an event at the People Summit. So there's also a People Summit going on starting on Sunday, where we will present a manual that we made, where we collected all the lessons that we have learned in our court case against Shell. So people can use these lessons in their own court cases, in their own campaigns, and maybe even in their own companies if they want to increase their efforts to take climate action and really take responsibility for their whole value chain and for all of their activities. So everyone is invited to join and to see how you can also take action and maybe even start a court case in the future. And I already, so they are already happening. Like Total is also being faced with a court case similar to ours. And I also in Italy received a letter. So it is just the start of, I think, a very big movement within climate litigation. Andrew, you're muted.
Hate it when people do that, and there I am. Noah, how do you feel that RWE is responding? Do you think that they are feeling that they are up against a wave that they cannot resist?
So one thing that RWE's lawyers have argued in the discussions around this lawsuit and in court is that one of the reasons they reject this legal strategy is because they say there's going to be a wave of lawsuits of all against all, because we all know we've all contributed to climate change in our own ways, driving cars, flying planes, through the things we buy, the clothes we wear, like we were just talking about. So in that sense, we're all part of the problem. But the issue here is that some have made much bigger contributions than others. And we know there are companies whose business model is based around burning fossil fuels and who have burned a lot of fossil fuels historically and made a significant contribution. And so what we're saying is that companies should take responsibility for that, financial responsibility in this case. But the companies, the people at the companies, they all know that things have to change. And even at the RWE in Germany that's facing this lawsuit over the climate change, they're trying to change their business model too, which isn't easy for a company that has most of its assets in fossil fuels. And so, of course, the companies need to be part of the solution as well. And so, our strategy as German Watch isn't just to be aggressive, but we talk to RWE and we talk to all these other major actors who need expertise in terms of how to change their business model, in terms of how to implement the just transition. There are people who are qualified to, there are many people employed in the fossil fuel industry. We can't just leave them sitting on the street. There's no doubt about that. So there have to be major changes, and the companies need to be part of that. And at the same time, we say they need to take responsibility for the damage they've already caused.
Okay, thank you. Wendy, on ecocide and on the Stop Ecocide movement, I don't know if you want to get into the specifics of that, I suspect not, but what's your sense of how the corporate world might respond to that? And is it the issues like insurance? Is it about public shaming? What do you think might have the most impact?
Yeah, so I definitely agree with the comments that we need to move faster. We all know the trajectory that we're on, and we're on the wrong one. But the way I'm going to answer that, Andrew, is something that hasn't been raised. If you were to ask me, what is the one thing that I think would actually move the regulatory framework forward, Jojo, to your point, that it's like within this framework, it's not working. If I could have one thing, what would it be? It would be a properly functioning carbon tax. Because if we actually were calculating the appropriate cost of pollution into our activities, then you would deal with that. That would be a force that would move everything in the direction that we all want things to move in. Right now, there are something like 40 different carbon tax mechanisms globally. They range from 10 cents a ton to $250 a ton. For us at Northland Power, in our province of Ontario, in the last 3 years, we've been under 3 different regulatory regimes for carbon tax. How can you plan? I mean, how can you budget? How can you come up with a strategy that it's going to, strategy that has the courage to do what Noah was just referring to and actually make that transition? You need to have a stability around that. And if there was one thing that we could have to move the world in the right direction, to me, it would be a global, functioning, appropriate carbon tax.
Roger, what do GE's lobbyists think about carbon tax? What's their engagement on that topic?
We're a global company, so different parts of the world are taking different approaches. We certainly support, strong policies that drive decarbonization of the energy sector and do, preserve resiliency at the same way. So we kind of take the policies as they come up and we try to be supportive and constructive. We've supported the Biden administration's ambitious targets. We've supported their policies on these things. Right now in the US, the focus is more on a clean energy standard. It may move on to carbon tax next. There's been some pros and some cons. So we haven't chimed in specifically on carbon tax, trying to stay in sync with where the administration's been going, which has been definitively more towards a clean energy standard. Probably not going in that direction, I think, given some momentum in Congress. So we could see the carbon tax issue get more attention, and we'll want to look at that very closely and engage on it.
Thank you for that. Jojo, regarding the Stop Ecocide process, would you just let us know where it's at, how quickly you think it might actually be adopted and have an influence?
Yes, indeed. So there's already been 16 states which are members of the International Criminal Court talking about this at parliamentary and or government level, in different ways. Some just saying, well, we're watching this closely. Some, there are actually bills going through parliament or, votes happening in different committees. So that's happening in many countries around the world already. There's probably another half a dozen countries behind closed doors who've not yet sort of said anything publicly. So this conversation is very live. The fact that the thing I mentioned earlier about the International Corporate Governance Network is a symptom that we're seeing popping up in different ways, but showing that the corporate world is actually calling for better regulation and clearer guidelines. And I think while I completely agree that a carbon tax is absolutely necessary, I think that it kind of reaches part of the problem, which is not just climate we're dealing with here. I mean, biodiversity loss will, take humanity out, just like, carbon emissions potentially will. So, there's issues that ecocide can address potentially that are broader. I think there's also an issue around the reframing of things, and that's something again that criminal law has the ability to do. So at the moment, for example, an incredible lawyer in America, Stephen Donziger, who along with Pablo Fajardo in Ecuador actually succeeded in a pollution litigation case against Chevron, one of the big oil majors. It resulted in a huge multi-billion pound fine that Chevron's never paid, and is actually engaged in a sort of illegal warfare against this lawyer who was representing lots of indigenous communities, and he's now been sent to prison. Extraordinarily, under private prosecution in the US, he's actually been sent to prison pending an appeal that hasn't even happened yet. And this is extraordinary, and that is partly to do with the framing of people who resist what is currently still legitimate business approach. So and environmental defenders are sort of dying by the dozen around the world. And effectively, if you switch that around so that they're resisting criminality rather than being framed as criminals themselves, you have a very different situation.
Jojo, we're going to have to leave it there. We're out of time. I just want to say I found that absolutely fascinating. I really appreciate Wendy and Roger coming in and really making some very interesting comments there. Also from Sophie, from Noah, from Nina, from Jojo. Thank you to the European Union for hosting this little session at COP, and best of luck to you all. Thank you very, very much.